Welcome back to the Reagan RedZone. I'm your host, Webb Milward. Joining me today from the Reagan team are Kevin Stipe and Harrison Brooks. Gentlemen, good morning.
Morning, Webb.
We are a couple days after the Super Bowl, and we've got another epic matchup for our listeners today as Kevin and Harrison debate and discuss their outlook on 2025. What are the greatest opportunities for privately held firms to capitalize on? Where should firms be focused? What are we seeing happening in the market? Obviously, a lot of attention right now on the top end of the market and some of the mega deals taking place. But what does that mean for the privately held firm? Where should we be focused? What are we doubling down on? And we're going to get into that a little bit today in the Red Zone. So with that, guys, let's dive in. What's on your mind this morning?
Well, before we get into some specific kind of action items that brokers can capitalize on in 2025, we just wrapped our Q4 2024 growth and profitability survey numbers. So this is that survey we do every quarter that firms can participate in, really the birthplace of the Reagan RedZone to recap those results. So I'd be remiss if I didn't give one stat from that. The thing that stood out to me the most in the Q4 GPS survey is that brokers, for the first time and since the history of the reported survey, are projecting the highest growth for 2025 that we've ever had. And that's 10% organic growth. So it's the first time that brokers have ever projected 10% organic growth. And that's a staggering number in context of 4 to 6% where we bounced for a long period of time back in 2009 and 2015 when we launched this survey. And so I'd like to start just to get y'all's reactions of what do you think is fueling broker optimism right now? Why'd they put up that big number, 10% for 2025 expectations?
Well, gosh, I think it's kind of clear, Harrison. If you look at the actual results that they've achieved over the last 4 years, they've become accustomed to numbers in the neighborhood of 10%. In fact, it's pretty amazing. If you go back to 5 years ago right now, I looked at the headlines in the New York Times 5 years ago today, and COVID was the number one headline in the New York Times. And it's amazing. You rewind back to that moment. And if you had said at that point that we're going to go through this global pandemic, and yet brokers will follow that pandemic with 4 years of 10% average growth, the best 4-year stretch in my career, certainly, you wouldn't have believed it. And so I think they've gotten accustomed to that. I think in many respects, maybe over accustomed to those kind of results. And so, 2025 may be a more challenging growth year. Perhaps they're over projecting, but I think they're just kind of used to hitting results like that.
I would say in that same 5-year timeline that Kevin just referenced, just the investment, the level of investment in recruiting talent, bringing in talent that's fueling your growth engine. Not that they didn't have great talent before that, not that they didn't have great organic growth, but you could certainly point to the market and other outside factors where you're getting a lift. But I just think day to day, a consistent, strategic, and really heavy investment in producer recruiting, especially bringing people in that are going to fuel that growth, accelerate that growth. I know we're going to be talking about recruiting today, but to me, just seeing a real shift in our industry, significant shift in being very serious and very focused on recruiting and how they're doing that to ultimately drive growth. So that's what I would point to if I had to pick one.
Cool. Well, we'll talk more about it later. Some different observations from the GPS survey, and we can get into some more numbers. But Kevin, purpose of this episode is to talk about practical things brokers can be doing. A lot of headlines last year, a lot of big news stories. 2025, what ways can brokers capitalize in 2025?
Yeah, my headline for this is simple. I think we have the biggest recruiting opportunity of a generation in 2025. Now, why would I say that? Number one, I think certain brokers that are forward thinking have understood for a while now that the most important thing that they can do is build an organization that is attractive to producers, a place where producers thrive, a place where producers are supported and they can maximize their income. So there are firms out there that are ready culturally to capitalize on this opportunity. Second, though, there's this kind of bigger cultural trend that's going on that I think is feeding this a little bit. And you see it with free agency in sports. You see it in college sports with the transfer portal and NIL money. And you see this kind of notion in our broader society about job changing and about free agency and about individuals, and they need to go where the home is going to be best. And so I think there's a greater fluidity to talent movement today. And then number three, and I think this is maybe the biggest thing that has been fueling producer recruiting, and I'm talking about of mature producers that are changing teams. The economics that are created by record valuations is driving a lot of what is happening in recruiting. You might say, well, why is that? And I'm going to lay out an example. And Webb, I'm going to make it super simple so that Harrison can understand it. Okay.
Thank you, Kevin. I appreciate that.
Here's what's going on. If you went back 10, 15 years ago, and you looked at a firm that wanted to recruit $1 million producer and do it by the book, not a smash and grab approach. We're going to steal the revenue. No, we're not doing that. But we're going to go ahead and recruit somebody who's got a 2-year non-piracy. We want them to wait out the 2-year non-piracy and then see what clients will follow. Historically, if you had $1 million producer, that firm that was going to recruit them was going to have to invest about $500,000 in compensation over 2 years to get them to come. If they're making $250,000 a year, 25% commission on their book, you need to say, hey, we'll pay you that through the 2 years, and then you can bring over revenue and we'll go from there. Well, if you think about that $500,000 investment compared with the hope of bringing over as much of that business as you could, the investment looked like a $500,000 kind of investment, somewhat risky, to hopefully get as much of that business after the non-piracy expires as possible. Most clients tell us that the over-under on that after 2 years may be 50% of the clients. So historically, that would mean if you got $500,000 worth of the business to come over in year 3 and your valuation was maybe a couple times that revenue, you'd invested $500,000 to get an asset that's worth about $1 million. This is 10, 15 years ago. Today, valuations are totally different than that, more than double the historical numbers. Public brokers, by the way, are trading at over 6 times revenue right now. So if you think about the dynamics today, the same $500,000 investment now yields something that if you get half of the business over, may be worth $2 million, $2.5 million, $3 million. The investment returns have gone off the charts, or conversely, the risk of that $500,000 investment has gone way down. And so the economics have gotten much more favorable to recruiting producers, even those with strong restrictive covenants. Now I'll just finalize this with what's different about then 2025 with this that we've seen this in 2024 and 2023. We've had the big trigger event in 2024 that leads to the opportunity in 2025. And that is we had 3 mega deals in the industry last year. About $6 billion worth of revenue got acquired. And a lot of that was in overlapping geography. And this is something we haven't seen much in recent years. But now we've got consolidations of very large brokers. By my estimates, we might be talking about 6,000 producers among those 3 deals. Not to mention the producers in the receiving firms that might be dislocated or whatever through this consolidation. So I think there's going to be a trigger of the integration of these firms that is going to likely result in more talent movement. And the question for the folks that are listening here that want to participate in that is, are you ready?
So, Kevin, the question of are you ready? Give me your top three things or top one or two that they need to do to be ready? When you ask that question, are you ready? I think what you laid out, we've talked about for a while. This is a trend that's been going on, but you said it best when you said the trigger event has occurred. Those deals, we cannot overstate the magnitude of the opportunity right now. So it's 2025, it's February. What are the top 1 to 3 things that you would say your best clients are putting in place to capitalize on that? And
I think the first one, Harrison, is, and you better have already been working on this. You've got to be the kind of place that is going to be viewed as the employer of choice in your marketplace. You've got to be a place that producers naturally want to be. And I'm not just talking about producers. I'm also talking about support staff and other roles, but producers primarily. But second, you need a prospect list. And if you're, just suddenly blind to who's going to be out there and you haven't been working on this list to prepare yourself for this moment for some time, then you're really playing behind. And I've seen some great clients had a very long list of respected competitors in their marketplace that if there was a trigger event like this, they could capitalize on. And then third, I would say this is just more of an internal question. Have you prepared your leadership team to capitalize on an opportunity like this? Do you have the dry powder financially to be able to make the bets on these folks? Is your shareholder base or your board of directors prepared to make large scale, chunky investments on this? I mean, you got to be ready. But certain firms are ready, and I think they'll see some real benefit out of this.
And Webb, before you give your answer of what you think they need to do to be prepared, I would just say, Kevin, to shine a spotlight on the biggest objection that I hear when I'm talking to clients is, that sounds great. I know the returns are there, but can we afford it from a cash perspective? You just gave me an example. That was $250,000 a year that I'm going to have to pay a producer, and the revenue's not coming. I get the returns on paper, the arbitrage of firms valued a lot more today than it was, 5 or 10 years ago. And one way, I would say a specific way that we've seen clients lean into this more is going to that producer and saying, hey, there's an equity strike opportunity at the end of 3 years in our firm. You can be an owner in this company. You can come along in the mission and the vision, and there's an ownership opportunity. And we'll set your comp at whatever you need your comp to be set at. How much do you think you need to make? We want you to honor your restrictive covenants. But whatever is unvalidated in that first 3 years, meaning their production does not support the compensation, is deducted from that ultimate equity strike. So that compensation structure alone is going to smoke out that producer that's really just a book sitter or a glorified account executive. And the producer that says, I'll take $100,000 a year and I'm going to go get the big equity returns, they get it. And that's who you want on your team. And so some of this is building the pipeline big enough to where you can actually find the folks that are the real producers. And so that's one tangible way that we're seeing firms that are cash strapped. Now, equity is a very expensive currency. So if I'm sitting there advising a client, I think it's a delicate balance on the company side of how much do you actually want to give up. But Webb, what would you say? What are the top 1 or 2 things that you got to have in place to capitalize on this trend in 2025?
Yeah, I would encourage us to put ourselves in the conference room and a leadership meeting amongst a couple of people at a $10 million agency. And the hesitations we often hear are no one's owning it, and we're questioning the level of investment we should put into it. So my takeaways from Kevin's comments and the lessons learned there are, let's get off the starting block there. Let's have someone own it.
When you say own it, you mean own the responsibility to recruit.
Yes. In that $10 million example, everybody's doing it 10% of the time, which means no one's owning it 100% full time. And so we've been debating that for 5 years. I'm sitting now in that leadership room of a $10 million agency. And for 5 years, we've been saying, should we hire an internal recruiter? I think we're getting enough from our external recruiters. Maybe we're getting enough from those of us that have a lot of relationships in town. But I think the takeaway from your comments, Kevin, is if we're going to seize upon and capitalize on the greatest opportunity in a lifetime to recruit and bring in top talent, we've got to first finally move over the fence on having someone owning it, being willing to make the investment in hiring an internal recruiter. Harrison and I just talked to a $10 million agency this morning that finally made that move January 1. And we all know and believe that they will reap the benefits of having that person in-house. Number two is then just understanding the level of investment. And here's the challenge I would put to you all and our listeners. Would we hesitate on making an investment to bring in a sales leader? We're a sales organization. A sales leader is going to come in. They're going to help develop a sales process, help us build our sales story, help us manage through our prospect pipeline of firms we're going after and clients we want to write. Why then would we hesitate to bring in that comparable person on the recruiting side? Someone to own it, someone to build our sales story, to build our pipeline of talented individuals. These muscles all exist within agencies, whether they're 10 million or 100 million. And so to me, this is the final trigger event to get off the hump, invest in the recruiter, invest in the process, and start to really move the needle. If all these people are out there and we want them working at our firm, I think we no longer can hesitate on this, and we got to dive in. And so it's exciting to me, but firms have to be willing to finally make that shift.
Well, guys, that's, Kevin, you kind of painted a picture at the top end of the market. Look at that as like the transfer producer, right? Transfer portal. You're getting some studs that are coming across, big books of business. I'd like to, if you guys are open to it, kind of double click in on this conversation and go to kind of the next trend or action item that brokers can take advantage of in 2025. And that's capitalizing on talent and technology. And the reason I'm pairing those two together is the talent piece, I think, is the youth component of this. So let's bring this down from the seasoned producer that's at one of these, larger firms, and talk about that kind of next generation producer. And I think there's two classes of that. I'd like to unpack a couple strategies as we're seeing firms roll this out in 2025 and what they've been doing. There's your producer that has prior sales experience, that's not out of college, right? That's proven, that doesn't know insurance, right? So a lot of folks like that hire. They're 25 to 35. They don't have insurance experience, but you can teach them insurance. The other is out of college. We're seeing more firms build internship programs than we ever have, I think, in this moment in time. So if you're thinking about 2025, an action item for your firm is think about an internship program. To Gallagher's credit, they've been doing this a really long time with the Gallagher internship program. It's become massive. And we're seeing, as we work with firms up and down the spectrum, billion-dollar firms to $10 million revenue shops, the conversation is consistent. They are putting in internship programs. And what they're finding is that you bring in talent. I think no one would disagree with this, but you bring in talent. That talent finds the right opportunity inside of the organization, right? As opposed to trying to hire for that position. And so some of that, you're going to bring folks in and they're going to become producers potentially after college. Maybe they become really good account executives. But regardless, or maybe they're providing perspectives on technology or what the buyer experience is, or from your branding and how you're reaching out and prospecting new clients, right? There's perspectives that those interns can bring. And so we're seeing more firms do that. Personal anecdote, I think for our firm at Reagan, we started our internship program back in Kevin, was it 2022? I think it was when we started.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and so we've had, we're coming up now on our kind of fourth class of interns, and I'm looking outside of my office right now, and we've got a bullpen, and we've got 6 or 7 folks that are just sitting in there, and I was running the numbers before this, and we've had 5 hires from that internship program. If you think about that, over the past 4 classes, we've had 5 full-time hires, all of which are still here. And if you talk about the conversation about millennials and Gen Zs, it's, hey, they have a job for 2 years and then they're going to rotate out. We are seeing the complete opposite in terms of if you're investing in these folks, you're making the environment a fun place to work in, you're creating a learning opportunity, you're letting them develop the same passion and interest in this industry that we all collectively, the 3 of us, have been benefactors from. That's a very compelling opportunity set when they're talking to their peers that are on this constant hamster wheel of anxiety of when's my next job and my next position. So I would love to get y'all's perspective as before we jump to like the hire with some sales experience. We'll talk about that in a second and unpack it. But if you're that leader of a $10 million firm that's thinking about this concept of implementing an internship program or bringing in young talent, what are the things you're putting in place to make sure that those young folks are successful?
Yeah, I'm talking about the greatest industry of all time and articulating our differentiation as a privately held firm and what that means. I'm talking about the impact we have on our community and how we support the community and businesses and individuals. I'm talking about how you can work with any industry you want. If you're passionate about technology, you can come here as a broker and you can work with technology companies. You can really do a number of things. And by the way, the economic case is an easy story to tell, right? It's a very resilient business and it's a wonderful environment to work in. And so I think it's less about leading with insurance and more about talking about impact and the culture we have. And to Kevin's point, being an employer of choice and what that means to us in our marketplace. And so I'm leading with things that really don't have anything to do with placing a policy. It's more about the overall impact and what being a part of this entrepreneurial pursuit and what we're building together can be. So,
yeah, and then I just add, I think the economy has changed in the last 5 or 10 years, and I think organizations that have internship programs are skimming off the top 10, 15, 20% of talent that is coming out of like the college ranks and getting people into apprenticeship programs. I think the game changer that I heard several years ago that has made great sense to me is that I remember, some early experiments into internship programs would bring in like a group of kids that might be in a producer internship program. And then, they'd find out that they weren't really suited to that. And then they'd move on somewhere else. And today, I think the funnels have gotten much broader. And Harrison, you mentioned this, that you bring them in a general way and rotate them through various aspects of what you do. And you're able to observe their work ethic, the way they carry themselves, their level of intellect, their level of engagement and kind of service mindedness. And then it may be that they go on a service track, it may go on the sales track, it might be some technical track, but the reality is you can keep them all potentially, even though they've got very different skill sets. And so trying to pigeonhole them into a specific role too early is a mistake that was made a generation ago. Today, it's a much broader funnel. Let's see if they've got all those other attributes we want, and then we'll get them in the right role. And I think that has really elevated the success rate of internship programs.
So I'm going to insert technology into this now before I jump to the producer that's had some sales experience and talk about a story there and what firms are doing. I want to set the stage of what we're seeing from a technology landscape. In February, Salesforce announced the Financial Services Cloud and building their own agency management AMS system. Historically, we've had two big players, right, in Applied and Vertipore, and now Salesforce they've been around. There's been case studies of Tech Canary and other type of AMS systems. But you see an investment, just like brokers specializing. Salesforce as a big company, right, with a lot of capital behind them, are specializing in wealth management and in insurance. And it's an open source technology, right, where you can customize it to how you want it to be. Well, we have Salesforce at our company, and we can tell you firsthand, like, you got to get engagement. People have to use it, right? If it's not customized and set up in the right way, people will not adapt it. There are late adopters, and there's people that are stuck in their ways, Webb like Kevin. And, you can
have a
go to
login.
the computer and you can log in for him. And, he doesn't realize that it's not Siri. He actually has to type on the keyboard to get it to work. So, but no, we're at this moment in time that that fundamental kind of backbone of an insurance agency is potentially facing a new entrant. Now, Applied and Vertipore have a lot of money that they're spending in development of their product, right? They've got that first mover advantage. So I don't wave the flag of, oh my gosh, crazy disruption. I think there is just another competitive advantage. We talk about Simon Sinek's kind of the infinite game book and kind of you're always competing. And that's what we're seeing on the technology side of the business. So that's on the backbone of the operations, right? So to do that, is it easier, talking about producers, is it easier to change that producer that is seasoned, that has been there for a long time, that's kind of stuck in their ways, or to bring in and develop your own new class that follows your program, that follows the way you sell business, that consultative risk management approach using technology. And most of our clients would say it's easier to kind of build that new class and that next generation than it is to kind of trying to change the hearts and minds of everyone inside of the organization. And so that's just something that I would say is the best way to create energy around that and movement is to bring in these interns, right? That class, those classes of new producers, and getting them to use the technology. You're getting new business wins, putting up on the board to say, hey, XYZ producer's been here 2 years and they just did 100,000 of new business production. And by the way, this is what it looks like when they go into their prospect meeting. They're not bringing the printout of the materials, right? It's all on the screen. It's on an iPad that's in real time. They're showing benchmarking, and there's tools and capabilities to do that. And why is that important? Flipping it not just from an expense side of technology and AMS systems, but flip the script and say, who is the decision maker at these companies, right? That you're the insureds. I was talking to a broker 2 weeks ago, and he was saying, Harrison, this is on the benefit side of the business. He said, in a 2-year period of time, we are having to resell our existing benefits clients twice. Every year we're reselling them because there's a new decision maker that they're having to resell and re-educate on the value proposition of the insurance agency, educating them on what we do in our process. And oh, by the way, that producer walks in that's younger and says, wow, that decision maker looks a lot like me. And that is happening more and more. And that is the demographics just of the buyer marketplace in general. So, but that agency said, but we're not sending that person out on that $150,000 new business account. We're not sending them out on their own. Like, we're pairing them up with someone that has been there and done that and seasoned and coaching them through it, right? Hey, don't get too excited, right? Like, this is part of the process. And so that's just what I would say on the technology piece, is that I think we're at a moment in time in 2025 where there's some actually practical examples of things that brokers can implement to move the needle. And the best way to do that is to have the talent inside of your four walls to go figure those things out. Because as a CEO or as a CFO and as a president of your agency, you've got a lot on your plate and you need some help to kind of navigate through these things. So that's the tech piece. What would you guys say? Is there one or two things that you would point to from a technology perspective inside of our clients that you're seeing them take advantage of right now?
Well, I think as people experiment with AI, and there's no question that AI is going to come in dozens, hundreds of different ways and support greater productivity in our industry. I just think with a younger generation, you're just going to have more of a natural approach to adoption of technology rather than resistance. And I think the best way to get your organization tech forward is to get as many young people as you can within your walls who that's just their natural habitat. They're gonna embrace that stuff, and so that's it to me.
Well, I'm gonna shift us into another topic, but for those of you weighing this and thinking about recruiting, hopefully we've been convincing and moving the needle in terms of how you think about it, what the internal team's like, what the investment's like, and where you might be able to capitalize this year. What else, as you guys sit here and look at the market, would you say top privately held firms could seize an opportunity or capitalize on in 2025?
Yeah, I'll throw out this. I think there's a once in a generation leadership opportunity that has emerged. And let me explain what I mean by that. Over the last decade, if you read all the stuff, there's been something like 6,000 agencies that have sold, that have been disappeared and combined into a bigger company. And not just, smaller firms. I mean, there's been a lot of large market leading firms that have done that. You take the state of Texas, McQuarrie, Henry, Bowles, Troy, Wortham, both independent firms a generation ago, now part of larger organizations. Assurance and Horton in Chicago. J. Smith Lanier in Georgia and the Southeast, Parker Smith and Feek and Payne West in the Northwest, and Graham in Philadelphia. All these large firms that were market leaders that are now part of a bigger organization, leaving an opportunity for a smaller firm that might have been fourth or fifth in that geography a few years ago to rise up and grab the leadership position in their marketplace. And not everybody wants to do that, but the opportunity that comes from that is incredible. I mean, it's a chance to shape your community, to have an influence on the direction of our industry. When you're in kind of market leadership role, you reap these benefits. To the victor go the spoils. Rather than you always trying to find people, when you're the big dog in your marketplace, there are clients, there are employees that come to you. They actually try to come into your organization. Associations, technology. There's a lot of opportunity that comes from being the marketplace leader. And then, of course, your valuation, because of the scarcity and the prestige factor, certainly your valuation is enhanced by that. And, we've actually had a bunch of our clients move into and enjoy this leadership role in the last few years. And I'll just throw out some things as I think about, what they've done to capitalize on that. What does it actually take to seize that opportunity? First, it takes a leadership team that is like hungry and has the bandwidth to work on the business. A lot of leaders and brokers, wear multiple hats, and a lot of times in production and other things, they've got to have the bandwidth or create the bandwidth to actually focus on working on the business. But you also need a leadership team that's like really, really engaged and performing at a high level. And that's important, because you can't create organizational accountability downstream if you're not performing at a high level within your own leadership team. And so the firms that we've seen really grab the mantle in their marketplace were very driven and had leadership teams that were very driven. And then they were recruiting machines. I mean, the way that you get larger in a geography and dominated is to relentlessly recruit. And then finally, I'd say they focus on their client experience. They understand that innovating is important in always finding new ways to get closer to and serve clients. And of course, we talk about specialization always. That's one way that firms really effectively innovate for their clients. Of course, there are many others, but I think that marketplace opportunity, we're seeing a whole bunch of our clients fill that, and it's a really, really exciting, and for several of them, really unexpected position that they suddenly find themselves in, and that's very cool.
And I would add too to that, I think, Kevin, that I really like how you laid that out in terms of how they're not only capitalizing on this runway in front of them, because a lot of the big boulders are out of the way and they see this window of opportunity, but also how they're building value at their own agencies, right? Irrespective of what's going on in the market. The two I would add are, robust investment levels, being willing, like we talked about earlier in recruiting, to put some money on the table and invest when you see an opportunity that can be capitalized on. And I think that's really important. And then two, what we're seeing a lot these days is top firms taking this very seriously is the idea of equity expansion. Finally thinking about your ownership structure and saying, hey, 3 of us have owned this for 30 years. What would it look like if we evolved that a little bit? We don't have to blow up our company, but we're going to expand ownership opportunity. It's going to help us recruit talent. It's going to help us retain talent. It's going to fuel that growth. It's going to ensure perpetuation. Those types of things help a firm go from 10 million to 50 million, whether or not the big firms around them are moving into another direction or not. And I think that's really an exciting thing that firms can capitalize on this year, because it touches on everything you mentioned, right? Investing in recruiting, investing in specialization, thinking about our C-suite, making sure we have people that can work on the business. All that requires some level of investment, and sometimes it requires some equity being in the hands of those people that are driving that growth. So,
Harrison, was that a little humble brag on Webb's part, that equity expansion thing, when we've just made him a partner at Reagan?
Kevin,
is that what that was all about? Are we being cued to say something?
I
to
think
recognize his greatness.
I think we all make mistakes sometimes, and some people slip through the cracks. So
I've already heard from all of our listeners. I'm feeling plenty of love. I don't need you all to come.
We are pumped to have Webb in the ownership ranks and as a partner, and that's what you want, right? When you bring someone into ownership, you want to be able to just shout it from the rooftops and just be like, yeah, we couldn't be more proud of this person that resembles just the values of our organization. So no, we're super pumped to have you. I would say, Kevin, when you said that market leadership opportunity, that is real, right? I have a lot of clients that are sitting there and they're $15 million in revenue and they're waking up and they're like, they're in their mid 40s and they're sitting there saying, oh my gosh, I'm the biggest player in this NFL city. This is wild. And if you're listening to this, I'm kind of tired, right? I'm exhausted. Like there's a lot of stuff to capitalize on in 2025, and that's what it feels like for these leaders. And so, they're balancing a lot on their plate, but never before, I don't think they have more tools at their exposure. I mean, firms that specialize in developing producers, right? Building programs and creating accountability systems. They know that it's a need for insurance brokers who have created an opportunity to market for that. You think about access to debt capital. Hey, I want to go buy some firms. Like, do I have to go to my local bank? There's specialty lenders that have been developed, targeted to insurance brokers, right? And you think about leadership opportunities of forums. If you name, however many of, whether it's an AssureX or CIAB or InterSure, and I could go down the list of these peer groups that are developed where people are sitting there saying, who do you have on your leadership team, right? What do I need to have in place when I'm 20 million or 30 million in revenue? And you're getting that from peer conversations and that collaboration. And so that's just where I would provide encouragement. If you're that leader in that market, like, it feels overwhelming, but it's totally doable. You've got more resources at your disposal today because we love, Webb, the way I was going to answer that question is we talk about specialization all the time. And there's no question, I don't think any of us would argue. Our industry's been talking about specialization for as long as I've been in it. And that's just a fraction of the time of Kevin, right? So
boy, that's for sure.
Just a fraction. And so we've talked about it for a long time, but I think there's an emerging trend here. If you're that market leader, specialization, yes, of course, but diversification. I went back and looked at, and what I mean by diversification, I mean diversification by line of business, meaning employee benefits, commercial lines, personal lines. Maybe it's a program you're putting in place. Maybe it's an MGA that you're launching as a business. When I looked at the growth and profitability survey, there's an interesting stat. 2015 to 2018, the fastest growing line of business was employee benefits. 4 years in a row, employee benefits led the chart. Okay. From 2019 to 23, property and casualty insurance. This year, 2024, personal lines. If you're a diversified platform right now, I mean, if you open up the news and you look at our economy and you look at what the market's doing, they can't read Trump, right? They don't know what's next. There's policies that are sometimes contradicting. There's some that are put in place that the market likes. There's others that pulls back. And so I feel like that's where we are right now in the world of insurance with, whether it's wildfires to, crazy auto claims to rising, cost of benefits insurance and exposures. And if you've built that platform that you can be kind of that three-pronged player across all of those, despite what comes, you're going to be well positioned to sustain that growth over the long run, which is the lifeblood of any privately held firm and any insurance broker. And so that would just be my encouragement, that when we're doing a lot of our strategic planning work, I've had more conversations recently of how do you build a benefits practice? What do you do? Where do you start, right? And those are the conversations that leaders are being bold enough to face, to say, let's build a new vertical. Let's do it. We know we need to. And that's not an easy thing to do. And sometimes that's bringing the talent on board to help lead the charge.
Great. Guys, for our 2-minute drill today, I'm going to throw something new at you. I think we've covered these topics pretty well, so we'll have a little fun here as we wrap. And I'll tee it up so it'll give you a second to think about it. Your most embarrassing moment in the industry. Not in your life. We don't want to hear anything about your personal life, but your most embarrassing moment in the industry. And look, 2025 marks my 20th year in this industry, and I can say for a fact I've never done a single embarrassing thing in that 20 years. And as a brand new partner, I'm not about to share one today anyway. But what is your most embarrassing moment? And then we'll close with that.
Man, I think it would only be fitting. Kevin, how about we do this? I tell what my perception of your most embarrassing moment is, and then you can share mine.
That's nice. That's really nice, Harrison. I
Yeah, why don't we do that, Kevin? We've traveled
Great
enough.
idea.
We've traveled enough together. Gosh, Webb, it's kind of like one of those rehearsal dinner toasts. Like, where do you start? There's so much content. I could talk about how Kevin at our annual kind of offsite.
We don't need a multiple choice.
annual offsite. I mean, he did get a superlative from our team that's most likely to be dressed like a high school football coach. Look, he's rocking the Auburn right there. So we could talk about that. But I think I want to share, because right now, Kevin, as we're sitting on this red zone, could become a grandfather. One of his daughters is going to have their first grandchild, and so that reminds.
We love tears in the red zone. We love emotion.
That's it. So and listeners out there, Kevin's looking for his grandfather name. So if you could just in the show notes, just kind of Kevin like K-pop or K-Daddy or whatever you want to say. Like, we would love to have you chime in and leave it in the show notes.
Hey, Webb, is this getting off the rails a little bit?
I'm about to throw it to you.
Kevin, don't worry. Here it comes. So we're on an airplane. This was probably 4 years ago or so. And just so happens we check our tickets, and Kevin's on the window, and I happen to be on the aisle. We're on the same row, and there's a seat in between us, Webb, and you have that kind of fear of who's going to sit in between you on the airplane, right? What's going to happen? And thankfully, this super pleasant young girl came and sat next to Kevin and I, right in between us. And she noticed that we were having some conversation back and forth. And she says, "Oh my gosh, do y'all know each other?" And I'm like, "Yeah, he's my grandfather." And she didn't debate it. She was like, "Oh, that's so sweet. That's cute. You guys are traveling together."
All right.
So that would be mine for Kevin. I mean, but really nice. Here he is. So that's really just nice. A timely moment of grandfather. Okay. So Kevin, go ahead. Take your pick.
Two things there, Harrison. First off, she thought you were 12, so it wasn't such a weird thing. And second, I'm pretty sure she kind of thought I was hot grandpa. And so,
hey, there's a name, hot grandpa, Kevin Stipe. There you go.
Our producers' inboxes are going to be filling up with grandfather names.
Actually, Harrison, I can think of your most embarrassing moment, and which actually doubled as my most embarrassing moment, which is a real neat trick that you pulled. So we had several years ago, we had a client taking us out to play golf at an ultra exclusive country club. So exclusive that two of the most iconic athletes in world history were members of this club. And so we go out and we're going to play, and Harrison's not much of a golfer. And we get out on the first tee, and he winds up and stubs his ball off the first tee. It goes maybe 20 yards. And so we're walking out there, and we've got caddies, and we go walking out there, and Harrison says, "Well, I'm a long way from the hole. I'm going to use my 150 to 200 club to try to get it there." And he pulls out his 3-wood. And me and my caddy are standing probably 40 yards to the left. And Harrison winds up and shanks this hosel rocket that's going 120 miles an hour, and it hits my caddy right in the rib cage, almost kills the guy. And we're standing there, and I'm looking around. I don't know who's seen it or what's happened. This guy practically died. We almost had to have him carted off the course. We find out it's his first day as a caddy, which I can guarantee was his only day. And that moment, Webb, doubled not just as Harrison's most embarrassing moment. It was my most embarrassing moment, because I had to be there as the guy who invited Harrison to come with the client. So it was a tough day for us. He's gotten considerably better since then, but yeah, that was a tough day.
Here he is touting the impact he's had on our internship program and all these young people he's given opportunities to, and yet the other side, he's just killing other people's dreams.
Exactly.
Just taking them out of the workforce. So, well, guys, thank you. Great conversation as we dive fully into 2025 now. We're halfway through the first quarter, and for those of you listening, thank you for joining us. We will continue to have these red zones at about a monthly pace, and look forward to continue to discuss kind of the key issues and trends that are impacting the brokerage space. So with that, have a great day, and talk to you soon.
All right.
See you guys.
See you, everybody. Thank you.